Hello and welcome to the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast. I'm your host Ben Porter, and I am joined this Independence Day by Darryl Jones of Splattered Inc. Games. How are you doing, Darryl?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. As I was saying just before coming on the podcast, I'm off to Loch Lomond tomorrow for a short break, so pretty happy about that. With yourself, what have you been up to?
Well, I have been spending every waking moment working on a Kickstarter, so I've got a few more weeks before I get a break. But I'm glad somebody gets one.
Yeah, I have heard Kickstarters are quite time heavy.
Yeah, it's fun though. I'm learning a lot. The process of running a Kickstarter is also new to me, so there's a lot to learn and a lot of marketing and but it's cool because I get to do stuff like this.
Absolutely. So you are working on a game called Dobbers: The Quest for the Key.
That's right.
Yep. So I think first things first, let's address the elephant in the room. In Scotland, the word Dobbers has quite a different meaning, which you were not aware of.
Yeah, no, I wasn't until I spoke with your associate a few days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's just kind of a funny coincidence, I suppose. But the name just comes from it's actually a term of endearment that my grandfather used to use, and when I was younger. I was into fantasy art and fantasy books like Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis, things like that. So I created, this fun race of kind of gnome-like creatures that live in the forest. And I called them Dobbers. And I think it's kind of fun. Nobody else has ever pointed out that it's got any dual meanings. So other than the wasp that we have in the States called a mud dauber, but that's kind of a different thing. So
yeah. I suppose phonetically, it has a lot in common with names for those diminutive little fey creatures that we're all quite familiar with, like hobbits and brownies and things like that.
Right. Yep. A friend of mine, when they were trying to explain the concept to somebody, called them forest hobbits. So, but yeah, brownies is another good one. I hadn't thought of them, so they kind of have that similar feel. Yeah.
What the Dobbers really put me in mind of when I first saw them was when I was a little lad. I was quite a fan of a TV show and a book series that was written by a lady called Enid Blyton, and it was called Noddy. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Well, her name sounds familiar. I may have to look that up and get more familiar with it.
Yeah, a lot of her stories are about creatures that are quite similar to the Dobbers. These obscure creatures from folklore like brownies and pixies and things like that. So it was quite nostalgic looking over a lot of your art. Is that something you've tapped into yourself?
For sure. Yeah, I really like that I've had people like yourself make those comments. Hey, this reminds me of my childhood when I was a fan of this book series or this TV show. Probably the one that's most commonly mentioned is the Lord of the Rings cartoon from the 70s, but also a lot of people mention Fraggle Rock. I don't know if that's something you are familiar with, but it was a puppet show.
It was a Jim Henderson show, wasn't it?
Yeah. So those kind of things to me, I think, work really well with the concept. So I definitely consider that kind of an endearing comment.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning here that you're not only a game designer, you've done all of the art for this game yourself.
Yeah, that's correct. When I was growing up, I was always doodling and drawing. I got into gaming. We did, Dungeons and Dragons and lots of role-playing games. And then, of course, we got into card games, my friends and I. And throughout that entire time when I was a kid in middle school and high school, I probably spent just as much time drawing my own art for the games we were playing, or making hybrids of the game, or whatever, where I was spent, that time creating, as we did actually playing the games. And it created that kind of love for it in myself, that I carried with me forever. So it's been fun to come back to that, because there was, of course, a time where as we get older, we would get jobs and have a family, and some of those things get put on the shelf, but they never really go away. So this has been a real exciting time just for me to get to embrace that creative side of myself, and hopefully share it with the world.
One of the things that J.M. Barrie says in Peter Pan, when he talks about Mr. Darling, the father, is that when he became an adult, he had to put all of his dreams in a little box, and then every so often he takes them out to look at them again. Yeah. So that's, I think that's the life I'm trying to avoid. I don't want to take them out and look at them occasionally. I hope that they come out of the box, and they stay out of the box, and they live in my home, and they live in my office. Yes.
So yeah.
I mean,
cool. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's cool.
Yeah, it's quite a sweet little metaphor, but it's deeply sad at the same time.
Right.
And like you say, it's great that you can actually bring those dreams out the box and bring them to life.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about Dobbers and how you decided to run with this as a concept for a game, because it started life, at least in the public sphere, as a comic, didn't it?
Yeah. Right after I got out of college, I wanted to kind of invest some time into just exploring, my own concepts, my own ideas. And it was kind of like this sweet moment between graduating college and looking for a full-time job. So I spent this time, and I wrote the comic book, self-published it. We went to a couple conventions and had a pretty warm review, but it wasn't enough to, really take off and get picked up by a publisher. But even back then, though, independent publishing was not as strong as it is today with Kickstarter and some other avenues. So that was fun. And, then life took over. I still fondly looked at the comic book and the ideas there. And then we had kids, and I read the comic book to my kids, right? So they kind of got into it. They enjoyed it. Every now and then I'd catch them pretending to play in the Always Green Forest as one of these characters, and they're fighting the wood sprite or looking for the magical key. And then as they got older, my wife and I were sharing our love for board games with them, of course. And it just seemed like the natural next step for me, if I wanted to kind of reimagine this story, bring it to life again for my kids, was to make a board game using those concepts. Mm-hmm. In the game, though, it's fun because the way the game is structured, I have like a lot of the story beats that are in the book, but when you play the game, you actually kind of make the story as you go. You're playing down the locations and the encounters on the board. And so they come out in a different order every time, or a different combination and things like that. So it's like you get all these moments from the book, but they've been put into a blender, and then they come out as a board game, and they're different every time. So I get to enjoy kind of a new story every time it's played.
A retelling, if you will.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Yeah. So we Unlucky Frog have not had a chance to play the game, but why don't you tell us what it's all about, how it works, that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So it is, at its core, I suppose it's a deck building game. And if you're familiar with that, everyone starts with the same 10 cards, and you use those cards to acquire new cards that go into your discard pile, that then you're basically kind of buying the opportunity to use those cards in the future. And as you do so, you gain a more powerful deck. So you kind of keep recycling your deck until it's better and better. But this game is quite different from any other deck building that I've played, and even some of the reviewers have said that too, because there's two new elements added to it. One of them is equipping your hero. So as you're acquiring cards, you're acquiring weapons and armor and items, in addition to some of the more traditional deck building cards, which we call effects. But those, when you acquire them and get them back in your hand, you play them on your hero, and they stay in play for as long as they can. So there's some effects that might take them out, but for the most part, they are semi-permanent. So now your hero has his base stats plus armor, which adds to his stats, or plus a sword that adds to his stats, right? So you're kind of building up this creature, this hero that stays out on the board, and he is who you use to move throughout the game board.
So you've got this deck building RPG hybrid going on almost. That's been pointed out too, and I for some stupid reason I could forget to mention that. But yeah, that's kind of the point, is I wanted to create a RPG feel when you're playing the game. So you're building your hero, leveling up, so to speak, so you can go on this quest for the key. And so in addition to that, it's a race game, and you're trying to get your hero to the key before your opponents do. And the way you slow your opponents down is you play encounters out on the board. So while you're building your deck to equip your hero, you have to kind of divide your resources to building the board. So there's a second row of cards to purchase that are creatures and locations. So you've got this turn, and you're like, okay, I've got that really cool piece of armor out there. Am I going to buy that? But so-and-so is about ready to move to the next space on the board. I think I'm going to hold off on the armor. I'm going to buy the swamp, and I'm going to put the swamp in front of them. So that whole tension between devoting your energy towards making your character stronger versus devoting your energy to slowing down your opponents is a really interesting core part of the game. Unlike a lot of games that I've played, it forces you to be engaged when it's not your turn. So you're spending this whole time, watching your opponents to see what they're going to put down in front of you, or if they're going to buy equipment and what equipment they buy, because some locations are strong against certain types of equipment or weak against certain type of equipment. So things like that, there's so much interaction between the cards that it's one of those games that, depending on how competitive you may end up with a really long, epic game because you're just, in this tug of war fighting with your opponents, but the time just flies. It just goes by super fast because you're so engaged with watching what your opponent's doing and also then trying to further your own agenda with it. It actually sounds a little bit like Mario Kart, almost, where you're trying to make sure that your opponent has as unpleasant a time as possible.
Yeah. It's Mario Kart meets Dominion, but with a lot more emphasis on the RPG side and a little less on the engine building. So you can still kind of build your engine like you would in a game such as Dominion, but it's not going to really determine whether or not you win. It might help you be more efficient on your turns, but really the strategy is more about aligning, the tougher cards against an opponent who has the certain type of equipment or whatever. But really, you can play it any way, really. There's so many different things you can do with it.
It sounds like it. It actually sounds quite a bit different from anything that we're really seeing on the market at the moment. But what I'm quite interested in is that you had this pre-existing universe with these pre-existing characters. How difficult was it to fabricate a game from that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for me it was not too difficult because as an artist, I like to focus on moments or, kind of still frames of the stories that I'm either telling or working on, or even experiencing as a fan.
Sure.
So within that context, if I needed to create the heroes that you get to play or the locations, so those moments I already had kind of still framed in my mind, at least at some point. So it was a matter of just coming up with all the illustrations. Now, the mechanics of the game, those were all just born in the last year. So that idea of trying to use deck building mechanics to create a journey RPG-esque game, I don't even know where that came from. It was just something my son and I, we were trying to create something fun that used some mechanics that we like, and it just kept growing and becoming more and more about the board and about the journey, which I think is great because that's what makes it unique on the market.
So it was a fairly organic process, it's safe to say.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my son helped me a lot. It was a good experience for us to just do together. Obviously, the production is 100% me, but as far as helping come up with ideas and enjoying playing the game together and play testing it and finding even the flaws plus the good parts, it was a really neat thing to do with him and my family.
Yeah. So you mentioned about playing the game with your family and with your son in particular, helping with the playtesting element. But you are in the unique position where you've pretty much done this whole thing yourself. That must have been quite an undertaking.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think I didn't probably understand it fully until getting to this point. The amount of work that goes into illustration, in addition to setting up the website or writing the rule book, or even just the amount of iterations with the temporary cards as we tested it. It just went on and on and on. And there was always more and more to do. For example, today I'm actually going to be releasing, showing to the backers and probably to anyone who's interested, a new game illustration or a new board illustration. The current board that you can see on the Kickstarter was one of the prototypes where it was all kind of just mechanics with a little bit of color to make it more interesting, but it was really just about the mechanics. So the board that was intended to be the final board and will be the one that gets printed is an illustration that has the feel of a location. So the whole thing is like kind of in the forest, and there's little bridges and creeks and paths and bushes and rocks and stuff like that. So it's kind of a D&D-esque top-down map. Hopefully it's still generic enough that the location cards take the spotlight, and they will, but it's still going to add a lot more visual interest and texture to the overall game. So I'm excited to get to do that, but I'm still working on it. That's, I guess, my point.
Yeah.
Even during the Kickstarter.
I feel like I really want to emphasize to the listeners here, just in case it's not already clear, Darryl has done all of the game design and all of the artwork for this game by himself. Just let that sink
even
in.
the graphic design too. So it's that's a different beast in of itself too. So
yeah, because as you pointed out earlier, there are a number of designers who, they work on games by themselves, but as you say, more often than not, they outsource the art side of the game to an artist, a freelance artist, more often than not. And you've done all of that yourself, which is staggering.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that. I know I worked hard on it, and I'm really pleased to get to do it. A lot of why I'm doing this is also because I love to draw, and I want to do that more as my career and less as a hobby. Yeah.
And I have to say as well, we'll probably put a link to your website in the notes for the show. But if you're not familiar with Darryl's work, go and take a look, because It is all of a very high standard, and as a lover of fantasy, I just really enjoy that sort of innocent and childlike aesthetic with the dark undertones, which very much, in my opinion, epitomizes what fairy tales are all about.
Oh, that's great. I really appreciate that. There's a bit of a balance that I'm trying to strike in conveying the game with that, because my style is got that kind of childlike innocence, like you said, but the game is still got a deep amount of strategy available to it. So it's not a kid's game, it's safe for kids, it's family friendly, all that stuff, but it's a high strategy, highly competitive game if that's the type of people you play with. So that's something to, I guess, keep in mind. A friend of mine, actually a reviewer, said in his review, it's easy to learn, but hard to win. So that sums it up.
I think a lot of the really good games aren't they, where they're very easy to pick up, but there's a certain amount of hidden depth to them. Cool. Because I mean, like, you take a lot of the very popular card games like Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, they're very easy to learn, but there's a vast amount of depth to them. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was my goal, and I agree with that. I've played a number of games. Obviously, I mean, that's why I'm doing this. I love games.
Yeah.
And I love those games that are really challenging. You get to play with the right people, and if you don't bring your best to the table, then you're going to lose. And that's the way I want to make games, so that kind of dynamic is possible because the game structure provides it. So it's fun stuff.
Yeah. So you mentioned just there that you love games. What do you play, and what in particular do you think has been informing your style and decisions as a designer with Dobbers' Quest for the Key?
Yeah. So as a gamer, I've just been in the culture, at least to a certain extent, for a long time now. As far as kind of the public-facing social side of it, I'm getting more and more into that. I'm listening to more and more podcasts and things, and that's obviously a bit of a tangent, but that's anyway, part of it for me. But as a young man, I really got into Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Those are probably the biggest kind of core hooks for me as a gamer when I was younger. So this was back when Magic, though, was just released. So this is like second and third year after it was published. So I've been doing it for a while.
Mid-90s, I think.
What's that?
That would be mid-90s we're talking, yeah?
Yep. So I still have some Ice Age and some Dark cards and stuff like that. So so that was a big hook. That's kind of where I started getting into it. And then through the years, I made friends with a guy named Jeff Martin. He runs a company called True Dungeon, or actually the company's True Adventures, but True Dungeon is the product. And in a lot of conventions here in the States, he puts together basically a live action D&D adventure, and you go through it. It's about 2 hours long, and it's not like a LARP. It's not just pretending and talking, but there's actually a lot of actual, like puzzles that you have to solve with, different penalties and things like that, and lots of cooperative work. He set up a kind of a battle mechanic, so you're not just boffer, like where you're whacking each other with foam swords, but it's still more of a dexterity based thing. And I won't go into all those details, but anyway, I became friends with him and I began working with him on projects. So like I've designed his website and things like that. And through that, I started going to Gen Con, which is one of the largest game conventions in the world. I mean, there's several, but it is one of the top ones.
Oh, it's top 3 quite comfortably, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been going to Gen Con now for 15 years and taking my family and just getting immersed in all the new games. So every year we have a new favorite. So I find it interesting how often I get this question, what's your favorite game? Right now it's probably Bunny Kingdom. It's just a really good strategy worker placement game, simple to play, hard to win kind of thing. But I know that's not going to be my favorite game forever. It's just for this year, right?
Yeah, you've got modes, haven't you? Everyone does.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, right now, Bunny Kingdom, I really enjoy Scythe, if you've tried that one yet. Those kind of have a more of a worker placement thing. As far as deck builders go, I went through my Dominion phase, but then that kind of phased out because it is such a engine building game. Like once you kind of know how to build the engine, then a lot of the discovery kind of goes away. That doesn't mean you like mastered it, but it's it loses a little bit of its magic. And but then Ascension, we enjoy that a lot. And then Star Realms, it's probably the first deck builder I played, and so consequently, that definitely influences the Dobbers quest for the key. But it's interesting because I always feel like I have to say, but it's so different, because there is the whole spatial element with the board, and you're building out these encounters, which are basically your list of things to overcome on your quest, right?
Sure.
So that's just, I don't know, that doesn't exist anywhere that I know of.
Yeah, and one of the things, one of the big complaints I have about a lot of deck builders is they can fall into this trap of not being particularly interactive, right? Where you can spend a good portion of the game just watching the other player drawing cards, and as you've mentioned with Dobbers' Quest for the Key, you've got this element of playing tricks on other players during their turn, which presumably circumvents that issue of deck builder games tending towards being a very solitary experience.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the game. You're going to spend a lot of time focusing your turn on other players. It's not, in my opinion, like to the same level of Munchkin where there's like this whole gotcha thing, but there is that sort of element present. So if you're whether you're building a encounter and you happen to notice that now again, so to back up one statement, knowing the game gives you an advantage. So the more you play it, the more you're going to learn the nuances of it, which I think is true for any game, right? Yeah. So fast forward, you've played a few times. You now know that the tree golem is immune to equipment that is thorn equipment. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you notice that player B has, thorn armor on. So this is kind of a funny thing that also happens in the game. There's a lot of, I don't know if table talk is the right word or smack talk or whatever, but there's a lot of playing with your opponent because of, I didn't even really explain this. When you play the encounters, they go face down. So you can see it's a swamp, but you don't know the point value of it. That part is face down.
So there's a psychological element to the game.
Yeah. So you're trying to distract them. You even say things like, hey, did you notice that so-and-so has whatever card? And then they look at that card. And while they're doing that, you buy the card that you're going to play and you put it on the board so they don't see it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a stack and all the cards underneath the stack. It's up to a bit of honor to not cheat when you do that kind of thing. But also it's up to you as a player to pay attention so that you don't get trapped by not seeing what so-and-so put out. So, I put that tree golem out there that's immune to thorn armor, and you weren't paying attention. You're wearing thorn armor, and you walk right up to that encounter, and you flip it over, and you can't fight it. So, boom. That kind of stuff's fun for me. Obviously, I want to win, and I don't want new players to feel like it's rigged against them. But that's also kind of the magic. You get to know it more and more, and you get to embrace those nuances and kind of depth of strategy.
Oh, absolutely. I think replayability is vital, particularly in a day and age where game prices are climbing higher and higher. People are looking for more bang for their buck, so anything that provides that, more power to you, I say.
Yeah, it's definitely one where every game's different, so it's very replayable. I'm also excited because it's also, with this format, very expandable. There's going to be a lot more opportunities to embrace some of these concepts and push them to new levels and create new interactions and powers, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
So your Kickstarter is currently live, and is, I think, when I last look, about 40% funded.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Unless something happened in the last couple hours.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Well,
yeah.
So you're about 40% funded. So maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. You do have 20 days to go, so plenty of time. But what does the future of Splattered Inc. look like?
Well, there's a lot of things that I want to do. I have a lot of ideas, and it's probably common for a lot of game designers. Regarding the Dobbers and that storyline, I've got two plans with that. This particular game definitely has the opportunity for expansions, whether that's new boards and new packs of cards with new creatures and locations. All that kind of stuff is highly probable. But my intention with the story is to create a series of games that are all different, that loosely connect together to make a bigger story, kind of a story arc, if you will.
Okay, yeah.
So this is the quest for the key, and then the next board game will be a different set of mechanics where it is the thief of the key. So now you've already got the key, right? So now you're continuing the story with the key, and the general concept for that is that one player will randomly be determined to be the thief, and no one will know who it is. So you play through this game trying to determine who the thief is and if the thief can actually steal the key. So, obviously it's a different concept, and hopefully that works. I mean, I've told other people and they like the idea. But also there's the whole thing with marketing and building your base customers, and they want everything to always be the same because people resist change. So we'll see what plays out. But that's what I want to do. I want to create a series of different games that all kind of connect together in the same world.
That sounds excellent, and we look forward to seeing that in the future. That is about all we've got time for. But for people who are interested in what you're doing and maybe want to back the game, where do they go?
Yeah, well, splatteredinc.com is my website. You can also go to dobbersquest.com. It's the same website. All over the site right now, it's mostly just pointing people to the Kickstarter. So if you go to Kickstarter, there should be a forwarder that's dobbersquest.com/Kickstarter. But if you go to Kickstarter and you just want to search for Dobbers Quest or anything like that, you can find me on there. You can find Splattered Inc. games on there. So you it shouldn't be hard to find. We've tried to make as many opportunities for people to find it as possible. And that's the idea. So, but yeah, you can, and also if you want social media, I'm Splattered Inc. everywhere. So Splattered Inc. on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those places.
The ink is literally splattered everywhere.
Splattered everywhere. Yep, trying to.
There you go. Darryl, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure having you on the show. And for all of our listeners, wherever you are, Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Hi guys, it's Josh from the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast here. Thanks for listening to us, and now be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for the Unlucky Frog Gaming. You can also show your support for Unlucky Frog through Patreon. Be sure to check out our website www.unluckyfrog.com to find out more.
Was that so hard?
Look.